So this is a an argument which honestly is not for normal people, because it's like a so I'll give you just a little bit background into this argument. So we were debating I maybe you would know those guys. They call themselves the black belts. They're J. King, Stretch, and Darth Reynolds and all these people. So we were debating these people, and these people are very obsessed with oh, show me the contradiction, show me the P and not P, and they would not take any metaphysical assumption at all, like any metaphysical assumption. So what you have to do to destroy these people is to show them an absolutely logical argument. So this argument is one such argument. The problem with it is somewhat that it is not very easy for normal people to understand. But I would try my best to explain it in the best possible manner. And please feel free to engage with it in forms of questions, and that is the way in which you would, understand it. So basic, and there's a video on this argument as well. We can post it in the server somewhere, so anyone can look at it and try to find it and understand the argument. That video is much more extensive and goes on to different details of the argument, but basically the argument is like this. First of all, to understand the argument, you have to understand the idea of existential propositions. What are existential propositions? So basically the idea of existential propositions is this: it's a computational idea. It's actually a very simple idea. It is grounded in the three laws of logic: principle of sorry, law of absolute middle, and law of non-contradiction. Basically, it is saying this: that any well-defined statement that you make about reality, it is either true or not true. That's all. That's what it is. Any proposition that I make about reality, any proposition about reality, if it is meaningful, right? If it is meaningful, then it is either true or not true. As simple as that. For example, I say a cup exists. This proposition is either true or not true. Anything that I say, Fula X is Y. Basically, whenever I'm making a proposition, what I'm essentially saying is X is Y. It's either true or not true. That's what an existential proposition is. Now, an this is what a proposition is, right? Any meaningful statement is a proposition. Now, what is an existential proposition? An existential proposition is particularly uh, a proposition which contains the word exists. Obviously, basically all propositions do in some sense contain the word exists, as in it uses the word is. But an existential proposition is basically a proposition when I say X exists, like Fula thing exists, this thing exists, that thing exists. That's the existential proposition of that thing. For example, for any X, the proposition that X exists is a ontological, or it's an existential proposition. It's a fairly simple thing. You exist, right? Your existential proposition is that you exist. A table's existential proposition is that a table exists. Now, these propositions, right? That is the basic idea. Now, when we say that existence is, or there is something that exists, there is something that exists. This is a proposition as well. Now, this proposition that there is something that exists is basically an OR gate. It's basically a disjunction of all the existential propositions of all possible existence. Basically, what am I saying here? What I'm saying here is that even if one existent exists, right? Existence is. If something exists, basically it is saying very simple thing, that if something exists, something exists. That's fairly self-explanatory. If anything at all exists, then existence is. Then it is true that there is existence. Then it is true that there is a lack of non-existence. So basically, that's what it is saying. That existence exists is basically the OR gate of all existential propositions. Now, what comes after this is basically this: that an existential proposition, right, for any object x, for any existent x, can be one of these two types. Either it is a function of some other existential proposition, or it is not a function of some other existential proposition. What do I mean by that? Basically, let's take a more intuitive example so we'd understand. Basically, when I say a chair exists, right? Now, is this proposition that a chair exists, is this a function of other existential propositions? Yes or no? For example, can a chair exist without something else existing? No. The answer is no, right? Whenever a thing cannot exist without something that is non-identical to it not existing, then the existential proposition for that thing is what? Is a function. Is a function of what? It is a function of the conditions it depends upon to exist. That is when I say, for example, a chair exists, right? By definition, I have given the truth value to the proposition that that atoms exist, for example, or that the four legs of the chair exist, or fula, whatever you want to call it. But I have already given, I already have to give truth value to certain propositions to even meaningfully say that the chair exists, right? So this is the basic idea of it. Now, the next move in this argument is actually very simple. It is an axiom in Boolean logic as well as propositional logic. This is basically saying this, that if you have an OR gate, if you have a disjunction, or if you, for that matter, if you have any gate, if you have any function, right, and all the inputs in that function, right, are functions themselves, right? If you have an input, if you have a function, and all the inputs in that function are functions themselves, right, then that function cannot have any truth value. How so? For example, it's I can give you a mathematical example as well. It might be more intuitive. Basically, you have A and you have B, right? Now A is defined by two variables, C and D. A is equal to C plus D, and B is equal to E plus F. But now E and F, right, and C and D are also variables that are defined by other variables, right, and so on. So if you have only variables that are defined by other variables, right, then you have no definition at all. You cannot have any truth value. Why? Because you only have variables. You only have plus, 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 plus. You don't actually have any input at all, right? And if you don't have, it's a basic law in maths, logic, whatever, that if you don't have an input, it is impossible for you to have an output. As simple as that. If you don't give an input, you would not get an output. If you only have functions, you would only have functions in the return, right? So now, if it is the case that everything in existence is a contingent existent, basically everything in existence, the truth value of it, the existential proposition of it has a truth value that is derived from other existential propositions, then it is true that the proposition that existence exists is basically an OR gate which does not have any input at all. But we know by definition that reality exists, and this proposition that existence exists actually does have an output, right? This means if it has an output, then it must have an input as well, right? But now, what would the input be? The input obviously is a simple ontological proposition. What do I mean by that? That there is an existent X, right, about which the proposition X exists is not a function of another. It is basically true in its own self. That what does that mean? That means that X exists. Now you can say, okay, an atheist can come up and say, oh, it's a brute contingency. For all intents and purposes, let's grant them that. We can have other arguments on whether brute contingencies do exist or not, right? But here, what we are trying to say is that this reality, even if it is brutally contingent, it is independent. This reality does not depend upon another reality to exist, right? This reality is absolutely self-sufficient and absolutely independent. And by definition, whatever is meaningfully said about this reality is this reality. For example, what I'm saying is basically this: whenever for because we are saying x exists is a simple proposition, right? X itself, there cannot be multiple ontological propositions that are meaningfully distinct about x. Why so? Because if there were multiple ontological propositions that were distinct about x, right, then the proposition that x exists, right, would depend upon the truth value of the propositions that that thing about x exists, and that thing about x exists, and that thing about x exists. So what is being said here is that x is simple in all respects. Wahid min jamil jihad. Basit min jamil jihad. That x is absolutely simple from all respects. There cannot be multiple ontological propositions about x. What we can say, we can meaningfully make different propositions about it, right? But all of them would refer to the very same reality in x. They would not refer to different realities about x. So this is an argument which basically not only proves the existence of an independent being, but it also proves that this independent being by definition has to be absolutely necessary. So it proves both the independence of a necessary being and also the fact that it has to be absolutely necessary. And what else does it prove? It also proves that everything else that has existence basically does not have any existence of its own. It's basically just a placeholder. Placeholder for what? Placeholder for the existence that is being granted to it by this self-sufficient basic existence. Everything is an expression, a mode of this existence. How so? Because whenever we say that y exists, which is not identical to x, what we are actually saying is that y exists, and this proposition that y exists has no truth value of its own. It is like a buffer gate. So basically, why is this argument called the buffer gate argument? So buffer gate is basically like a bulb, in very simple terms. Buffer gate is like a bulb. What a buffer gate does is that it only reproduces the value of its input. So if the input for the buffer gate is 1, the output for the buffer gate would be 1. If the input for buffer gate is 0, the output would be 0, right? Now, by definition, infinite buffer gates, right, cannot have any truth value of their own. Why? Because in Boolean logic, infinite buffer gates are actually one buffer gate. No matter how many buffer gates you put, because atheists keep telling us that, oh, you're making a what? You're making a composition fallacy, right? But that is exactly why we use the concept of a buffer gate. Why? Because buffer gates, no many how many of them you put, right? They would always have the truth value. They would always collectively act like one buffer gate. As simple as that, right? If they have an input, they would have an output. If they don't have an input, they would not have an output, right? Now, if someone says, oh, there are infinite buffer gates, and the buffer gates have a truth value, right? But there is no input to the buffer gates. We would say that is, we don't know what you're saying, because that's literally a logical contradiction, right? Why? Because buffer gates, by definition, need an input. If you're saying, oh, they are buffer gates, and they are giving an output, but there is no input, that is impossible, because buffer gates are expression of what their input is. If they don't have any input, they would not have any output. If they have a zero input, they would have zero output. If they have one input, they would have one output. The atheists are not even saying that the buffer gates have zero input. What they're actually saying is that the buffer gate has no input at all. That's a difference. In Boolean logic, it's a difference, because you can have an input 1 or 0. It is impossible to have an undefined input. In any logical system, it is impossible for you to have an undefined input. Because,
Yeah.
yeah, Okay, this thing that you're saying, we can talk about Asharis. This is an argument for the existence of God, bro. Uh, we can talk about Asharis, no problem. We can talk about it, but after I present the argument. So basically, now what we are saying is that in reality, everything, it is impossible for everything to have derived existence. How so? Because if everything in reality has derived existence, think of it. This is actually very simple. If everything in reality has derived existence, right, then it is true for all of reality that everything in it has derived existence, right? Nothing has an existence of its own, right? But it is quite obvious that existence itself has an existence of its own. It is not getting its existence from something else. It is not getting its existence from an outside source because that is impossible. Because if existence were to have existence from an outside source, that would be a logical contradiction. Because P, the non existence, would be implying existence. But it is impossible. Both of them are contradictions. Either existence exists or non existence exists. Both of them cannot exist at the same time. So it is quite literally a contradiction to assert that existence does not have existence on its own. But if everything in existence does not have existence of its own, then it is quite obvious that existence itself does not have an existence of its own. To make it even more simple, it's like this, right? You have mirrors, right? Now, mirrors, by definition, it is like the definition of mirrors that they cannot have light on their own, right? Now, even if you have infinite mirrors, right? Or no matter how many mirrors you get, they cannot have a light on their own. And if you're asserting that there is light, right? By definition, what you are saying is that there is a source of light. There is something which has light on its own. To make it like even more simple, it's like this: that you have an electric wire, right? Now, for an electric wire, there can be only two possibilities, right? Either if the electric wire has current, and this is not a very accurate physical example, but it is good for imagining it, that every electric wire, either it is directly connected to the source of existence, also to the source of current, or indirectly connected to it, right? Now if someone says that there's an infinitely long wire, right, and it is not connected to the source of existence, right? It is not connected to the source of sorry, it is not connected to the source of current, right? But it has current. That is a logical contradiction, because what it means to have current is to be connected to the source of existence. As simple as that. You can imagine it in another way, which might make it even more simple. Think of all possible existence. Think of a pool of all possible existence, right? Now you have all possible existence, right? Everything that could have existed, right? Now from these things, we have a smaller subset of things that do exist, right? First, think of everything conceivable in itself that could have existed. Then think of that which exists right now. This is a subset of things that could have existed. Now, in the things that exist right now, some things only exist in virtue of the other, right? So leave out everything that exists in virtue of the other, right? Why so? Because their existence is just the existence of their cause, and their non-existence is just the non-existence of their cause, right? So leave out everything of that nature. Now, why am I saying that? Because their existence is just an expression of the existence of their cause, right? Now, if now there can only be two possibilities. Either in the set of things that exist, either there is something that is that directly has existence, right? Or there is nothing that directly has existence, that has existence on its own, right? That has actualization on its own. Now, if it is the case that there is nothing that has actualization on its own, then what it means is that reality in itself, existence in itself, right? Existence as a whole, the set of all things that exist, right, does not have any actualization on its own. Think of it like this. The reality itself does not have any actualization of its own. What then how can reality even have actualization if it is not connected to the source of actualization in any way? It's absurd to say that. This is why we I went on a debate with Destroyer, who is a very famous atheist in here, and he has a channel as well. You can check out his channel too. So at the end, what he had to say was that basically this, that we gave them many examples, right? So at the end, what he was saying was this, that oh, it is possible for for a whole to be in motion, right? But none of the parts to be in motion. That's what he was saying. Or simply this. For example, you have a body of water. What he was saying is basically this, that the body of water can be moving, but all of the particles in the body of water can be still. That is what it implies. Why so? Because what they are saying is that, oh, the set as a whole has existence of its own. The set as a whole is independent. Because nobody can deny this. Nobody can deny this. That the set of existence as whole is independent. Because it is literally impossible for existence to derive its reality from something else. But what they are saying is that the set of existence, the set of all existence, is it's independent. It is not getting its source, its existence from something else. But there is nothing, right? There is nothing in the set of existence that has existence on its own. That's a logical contradiction, because the set is not different from the whole, right? So to some for someone to call it a fallacy, right? They love the word, you're making composition fallacy. Composition fallacy only happens in two cases, right? Either there is emergence of properties or there is a de-emergence of properties. Emergence is basically what? For example, the a singular feather is not heavy, right? It's light, but a collection of feathers can be heavy. So heaviness is an emergent property. Similarly, there can be de-emergent properties as well, right? That uh, just take light, right? Being the property of being light, not being heavy, right? Now, a singular feather is has the property of being light, but a whole huge bunch of feathers does not have that property. So, being light here would be a de-emergent property. If a property is neither emergent nor demergent, then it is impossible that uh, you can call it a composition fallacy. That literally becomes impossible, because the only case in which you can say, oh, this is a composition fallacy, is that either the property is emergent or demergent, right? But independence, being existing in its own self, is neither an emergent property nor demergent property. How so? For example, it is impossible uh, that you have a set of three things, right? And if one of them has the property of being self-sufficient, right? Then even if no matter how many you put in there, right, it would remain true that one thing in the set has the property of being self-sufficient. Obviously the set itself would not become self-sufficient, but it would remain true that there is something in the set that is self-sufficient. Similarly, it cannot be emergent either. How can it not be emergent? Why so? Because if everything in the set is dependent, right? Everything in the set, it is true for everything in the set that it does not have the quality, it does not have the predicate of being self-sufficient or having existence on its own, in its own self, right? Then no matter how many things you put by it, right, it would not be true that the set itself gets the property of being having existence in its own self. Why so? Because how would this predicate of having existence in its own self be grounded? It should be grounded in one of the parts, but none of the parts have this predicate. So by definition, the set cannot have this predicate either. So this is basically what the buffer gate argument is. It is somewhat complex, but the good reason, the it is by far the best argument, I would say. And why is that? Because this argument does not make an appeal to the PSR, right? It does not make an appeal to the PSR. It does not say that, oh, for everything there has to be a cause. That's not what it's saying, right? It is going more on the idea of what you have already considered that it has a cause, right? It's not saying for everything there has to be a cause. What it is saying is that, oh, either in reality there are things that have a cause or things that do not have a cause. That's what it is saying. So it is a very subtle difference in the logical structure. But for people, for is particularly atheists who question the PSR, right? This is a very good argument. And the way to avoid the PSR is by not making a claim about whether the independent existent is a brute contingent or an independent existent. For us, right, it does not matter. Why so? I will tell you why. Because when we have proven the existence of God through this argument, at the same time, we prove a kind of necessitarianism. So now what does it prove? That there can be only two possible worlds. One, this actual world, and the other world is absolute non-existence. Then all we have to do is that we can simply use an argument that, oh, absolute non-existence cannot exist, right? Then by definition we have proven that the independent existence that we have proven is necessary, right? Or we can use other argumentation as well, but the basic thing is that this argument does not use the PSR, so it makes it even more stronger. So now if someone has any questions, they can come up and ask. I don't know how convenient my explanation was. I would just drop a link about it mm, in the let me see, which channel should I put in Abstra? Do you have an idea? So people can watch the video later on as well. So that's what I can do. And the video has more details. The video definitely has greater detail in which you can watch the video and understand the argument in greater detail. And you can obviously share the video around too. So it's a around 25 minutes long video. I would just share it. So yeah, I would not be debating an atheist right now, but we can surely do that in later rooms. Right now, I would prefer if you just ask some questions. King wants to ask some question.
No, I was going to debate you on the subject, but apparently you don't want to do that. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. We can surely debate later on, probably.
Whenever you're ready, buddy.
Oh, okay, okay, sure thing. Uh, yeah. If someone else has any questions, please go ahead. Otherwise, um, otherwise I can hop off. Hmm. Okay. Thank you very much, guys.